So I want to welcome everyone here tonight for what I am certain is going to be fascinating and exciting discussion dealing obviously with the evolution of the media. I'm not surprised to see the subject has turned out so many of you, and but it's great that it has, and as always, makes me feel good when you come back to the Seigenthaler Center. The programs focus so often on discussion of the media, and so tonight we have three truly distinguished panelists to talk about this this relatively brief history of the evolution of the media. And so I'm going to make, I mean, I could spend more time than we have tonight in talking about these three panelists, but I think I'll try to be brief and hit the high spots. David Plotz is editor of Slate.com, and based in the nation's capital, and he edits and contributes articles primarily covering politics, science, and culture. He's also served as a freelance writer for the New York Times, for the magazine section, for Harper's Bazaar, Reader's Digest, Rolling Stone, New Republic, the Washington Post, and GQ. And prior to his present role as editor of Slate.com, he worked as the magazine's feature writer, political columnist, and also was a media columnist for Slate. He's the author of The Genius Factory, Curious History of the Nobel Prize Sperm Bank, and also good book, The Bizarre, Hilarious, Disturbing, Marvelous, and Inspiring Things I Learned When I Read Every Single Word of the Bible, both of which were widely and well reviewed. His books include The Genius Factory, as I said, and the good book. He's a graduate of Harvard, and he understands the media, as do his two associates tonight. And Willie Geist co-hosts NBC's Today show, the 9 a.m. hour, and also he co-hosts MSNBC's Morning Joe. He's contributed to NBC News programs and to the NBC Sports Group. He has a broad background in sports television. He formerly hosted MSNBC's Way Too Early with Willie Geist program that he created. He's contributed to the Today Show, the Nightly News with Brian Williams. His background in television, as I said, includes notable experience in sports television. He has covered the Super Bowl, the NCAA Final Four, the Masters, and the United States lawnmower rowing circuit.
That's true.
He's authored the New York Times bestseller American Freak Show, and is co-author of Loaded, Become a Millionaire Overnight and Lose 20 Pounds in a Week or Get Your Money Back. Nick Thompson is the editor of NewYorker.com, where he oversees and manages the magazine's expanding and almost exploding website. He's a contributor to a contributing editor at Bloomberg Television, technology contributor at CNN International, a co-founder, and this will be of interest to many of you. He's co-founder of the Atavist software company and digital magazine, which you may know has attracted, like a magnet, many big and well-known investors. His book, The Hawk and the Dove, Paul Nitze and George Kennan and the History of the Cold War, was published in 2009. Great reviews. And prior to his role at New Yorker, he was a senior editor of the New Yorker. Prior to his role to the website, he was senior editor of the New Yorker and has been a senior editor at Wired, senior editor at Legal Affairs, and editor of the Washington Monthly. He writes regularly about technology for the New Yorker's website. And thirdly, our distinguished panelist is David Plotz, is Nick Thompson.
Me.
Is Nicholas Thompson.
You got them all covered.
Have I?
Yep, you got them all covered.
all.
You know when you get 86, how it happens.
You're amazing.
Old boys think slow and Southern boys talk slow. Manda Little doesn't need much of an introduction to a Vanderbilt audience. She's writer in residence in the English department at Vanderbilt. She teaches investigative journalism and creative nonfiction, and I could go on and on and on and on, but I know you all think I've gone on long enough. My wife, Dolores, is saying, John, fast forward, fast forward. It's my great pleasure to present to you, my dear, this distinguished panel.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Seigenthaler, thank you so much for having us here in this beautiful space and this building. We were talking about you earlier, and we said this man is a living legend, and it's true. It's very rare to get to meet a living legend, and only in you. And thank you also so much to Mark Schoenfeld. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Mark is the chair of the English department, and he's responsible for making this happen, as is John Gear, who's the chair of Poli-Sci. And maybe 4 or 5 other departments jumped in on this event, and I love that because, you know, we're here talking about the media, which is a topic that infuriates and upsets a lot of people, and yet everybody, you know, relies on it at the very least, and if not, is obsessively sort of connected to media all the time. And I want to ask you all to introduce yourselves, having had this wonderful introduction, but take 3 minutes or so each to talk about what you do, but also why you do it. Why are you in this infuriating but also necessary and kind of beloved and loathed industry?
Wow, what a setup. Okay, thanks.
No pressure, you know. Just
Do I go first because I'm next?
yeah, you go first. You go first.
All right. So you know, there are 3 parts to my job, or 3 things that I do that are related to media. One is, you know, the television part, which is, you know, there my goal is to explain complicated things happening in technology clearly and quickly so people understand them. And I think there's sort of a civic value when there's a hack attack to try to do the best you can to explain what happened. So that's a pretty easy part. Then I have The Atavist. So The Atavist is a magazine that we started creating for tablets and that we turned into a software company. We basically built software to create the magazine, and it turned out that all these people wanted to buy it. And so what we're doing there, we started it because we didn't think magazines had done a great job of figuring out the future of storytelling, integrating text and video and audio, serving up content the way young people want to read it. And so we built the magazine to try to, you know, serve that need, and then suddenly it turned out we have this software, and so I do the first part because I love storytelling, I do the second part because I want to make money. And then the third part of my job is you know, by far the most important and the one I spend, you know, 99% of my time on, and that's running the New Yorker's website. And the goal there is to take this 90-year-old magazine which has this incredible, wonderful history, and has all these things attached to it, which I truly believe is the best print magazine in the world, and the best magazine that's been created, and figure out how to translate all that it does onto the internet. Right? So it works really well coming out for every week and having reporters spend months and months on a story. It works really well with print advertising and subscription revenue. And how do you make that work in a digital world, in a world where you have to be very fast, where you have to be responsive, where you have to take these ideals of storytelling, of narrative, of sort of literary sensibilities, and translate them into really fast-paced arguments that are happening online that are SEO optimized and work well on social media. And that's a really hard challenge, and I think it's intellectually interesting to me. It's important. I've always loved storytelling. I've always loved reporting. I've always loved the things that drive most people into journalism. So it's intellectually interesting to me, and I think it's civically interesting because I think the New Yorker has real value. The world is changing, so what can I do to help the New Yorker thrive in the new world? So that's why I do the third part of my job.
Very complete explanation. I like it. My name's Willie Geist. For the record, I went to Vanderbilt University, graduated class of 1997. I actually just brought my kids back here. My 4-year-old's out committing a felony somewhere right now. Brought them back, and it's so great to be back here. We had this romantic view of walking our kids around the campus and explaining, here's where we first met and all this. And I turned to my son and said, what do you think? He said, I want to go back to the car. It didn't go the way I planned it, but it's great to be back at Vanderbilt. And also, thank you so much to John Seigenthaler, whose contributions to this country go far beyond journalism. You know his history, you know his past. He was there on the front lines in the civil rights movement, and I'm grateful for the introduction tonight. Thank you, John. My job is broken into two parts. At 6 o'clock in the morning every day, I report for duty to Morning Joe on MSNBC, which is a niche cable political talk show. That's what it is. We know what it is. We're sort of, I don't know if you read Politico online or any very specific political sites. Morning Joe is sort of that on television, and we don't try to be anything different from that. And I think we'll talk more about this tonight, but that's what's happening on television in cable, is that everybody's carved out their place. You don't have broad sort of news gathering news shows, except for the 6:30 evening news and the nightly news, which still get huge audiences. On cable news in particular, that approach doesn't work anymore. You have to have a thing. So our thing is politics, and that's what we do. And then when I'm finished with that show, I run across 49th Street, and I do the Today Show, which is something different entirely. And I think my two jobs are an interesting contrast that sort of lay out what we're going to be talking about tonight. The Today Show, in many ways, is a legacy media company like the Washington Post or the New York Times, which is to say it's been around for 60 years, it's had a way of doing things, it's been successful for a very long time, and all of a sudden we're running up against this wall of, whoa, things are changing, how do we adapt, and how do you transition from being this huge, monolithic, bureaucratic vehicle to being nimble and adapting to this new media world. So in my mind, Morning Joe is a little bit more like what these guys do, which is it's a smaller audience, it knows who it is, and it attacks that slice of viewers. The Today Show tries to capture everybody, and that's a difficult task these days. So I defer, frankly, to the two of these guys about what's happening online because they're in the trenches every day with what they do, so I'll be interested to hear what they have to say. But I do have some sort of version of that in television, and I get to live in both worlds, so that's what I do.
So I'm David Plotz. So Nick has 3 and Willie has 2. So should I go 2?
Go to 1.
3.
Just keep going down.
We're going to 1. I thought about 1, but I can't do it as 1. So I have, I see my job as having 2 significant roles. So I edit Slate.com, which is an online general interest magazine, which is always been online. It was started in 1996, and it's still around. So it is new media, but it's an old media, new media. So we have experienced every possible thing there is to experience in the digital journalism world. And I've worked there the whole time, so I saw it, when there was nothing. I've seen it when everything was happening. I've seen it when Huffington Post was the thing, when BuzzFeed was going to be the thing. And it's been fascinating and rewarding for me to watch as Slate, which has a particular niche. The niche is sort of smart, funny, counterintuitive. And it's been that way since 1996. It's still there now. In 1996, we reached a couple 100,000 readers. Last month, we reached 32 million readers. Mm-hmm. And to watch to see how, when you have a sensibility, how can you maintain that sensibility, maintain your editorial integrity around that sensibility, but learn to use different media, learn to use video, learn to use audio, learn to tell stories with blogs, learn to tell stories at enormous length, learn to tell stories with a, basically a traditional magazine form. And so I think of my job as being kind of a mad experimentalist with this magazine that we have, and trying all sorts of new forms and seeing what is it that will work in digital media that will reward readers in 2014, and it will be different than what it was in 2010 or 1996. The second thing I do, which is important to me, is that I do a lot of podcasting. And I don't know if any of you here are podcast listeners, but and I'll probably talk more about this tonight, but I think podcasting is one of the least explored, least understood digital media, and has a huge place going forward in digital journalism that I'll talk more about tonight.
So I noticed that none of you mentioned the fact that you write books. That was not in your 1, 2, or 3 items on your list. But books have been really critical to your careers, and you've been incredibly successful at it, which is very, very hard to do today. So why do you write books? Will you continue to write books? And we all hear a lot about the death of the book, and clearly they're not dead yet, but what do you think about that? Are they going to die? And then we'll get into the more sort of, the nuances of new media. But I want to start with old media. And David, since you're nodding, I'll go first.
I've written a couple of books. I love doing it, and I think that books, to me, as a writer, and I don't know if you guys will agree with this, bring much more psychological satisfaction than any other thing that I've done. So the book I did a book about a Nobel Prize sperm bank. It's a really weird subject, but the year and a half I spent immersed in that was the most intense reporting and writing experience of my life. I could tell stories.
Did you donate?
I did. But I stopped them before they could distribute it. They were really excited that I went to. They have this great upsell that they have. So I only have a BA, but I do have a BA from Harvard. So they were really excited that I had a BA from Harvard. But they had what's called a doctoral program, which means that anyone who is pursuing a graduate degree that is conceivably called doctoral, so like lawyer, JD, Juris Doctorate, they count. They will basically double the charge of the sperm.
Oh, really?
And so they kept asking me, like, they're like, are you planning to go to grad school?
Amazing.
Definitely bookworthy.
But just on the books, yes, it's hugely psychically satisfying. But my book sold in the tens of thousands of copies. If any article on Slate got as few readers as my book got, I would be so embarrassed by that article.
They are depressing. When you see the numbers, you say, oh, that's sold. I did pretty well. I made the bestseller list. And then you see the total, and you're like, wow, that gets you on the bestseller list? They're smaller than you think they are, those numbers. I come from a family. My dad was a newspaper guy. He started at the Chicago Tribune and was a writer at the New York Times. So writing is in our family, and the truth is I love to write. I don't get to write as much as I'd like to on television. I'm out interviewing people and doing pieces, and you write a 2-minute piece for the Today Show, and that's not writing in the sense we're talking about. So for me, it's a great outlet. You get to pick your topic. Nobody's assigning it to you. You find something that fascinates you. And as David said, you sit down for a year or 2 years or whatever it is, and in my case, you go into a dark room on the weekends and avoid your family, and you find time to do it, but you're so deep inside a subject. And it's just for me, a totally different way of expression than television. And I don't think I'd be satisfied just doing TV, because I think there are so many other muscles that are to be flexed if you love writing, and books allow me to do that. And this feels like a good time to point out that on May 20th, all of you in this room can purchase Good Talk Dad by me and my father, which is a father-son book, but not in a schmaltzy way. Don't worry, we have no advice, or there's not a lot of hugging or anything like that. So we have another one coming out.
And then you'll have to write one with your son.
Oh, God. That kid.
Nicholas.
I mean, for me, my book I had an idea. The idea was to tell the story of America during the Cold War through the rivalry of Paul Nitze and George Kennan. It was called The Hawk and the Dove, and it was an idea that initially started as a magazine story right after Kennan died. So Paul Nitze was my grandfather, and what happened was Kennan died, and I read his obituary, and I saw these incredible parallels with my grandfather's life, and I was talking to my father, and started learning about their friendship and rivalry. I wrote an article, and in the process of the article realized, it was one of those things where I filed 2,000 words, and the editor said, can you add a little bit? And I came back the next day with 6,000, which is a horrible, terrible thing to do as a writer, and as an editor, I should have known that. But it was a sign that this is an interesting idea, and you can't really tell the story of America during the Cold War in an article, so I turned it into a book. So it was more just having an idea that seemed to work in that form. As to your question, are books going to die? Absolutely not, no chance. There's this myth that young kids don't read. I think it's kind of baloney. I think young kids read differently. I think there's an opportunity to transform the publishing industry. But people who are afraid that the books are going to die are wrong.
Right. And also, don't you guys think...
And they're going to go up on May 20th. There's going to be a huge spike in sales.
Huge spike in sales. But don't you guys think that so I think there are two reasons why books are not going to die. One is because of stuff that, like what you're doing with The Atavist, where you're reinventing a medium. People are going to consume longer writing digitally in a way that they find hugely satisfying. Who has a Kindle or reads ebooks in this crowd? Yeah, basically everyone.
Everybody.
So the medium, the technology is serving the medium. But also, don't you guys think books will not die basically because writers are egomaniacs, and everyone wants to write a book, and they're going to continue to want to write a book because you get so much reward, even if you sell 1,000 copies. You get a book party. You get your mom is really happy with you for a change.
And the barriers to writing a book are dropping as the technology changes and it becomes much easier to self-publish. So there will be lots of books. There will need to be discovery mechanisms that help people find the right sorts of books. As bookstores disappear or as Amazon kills them off, an important discovery mechanism disappears. But the world is going to evolve. The world is going to change. Our culture needs them. Writers need them. People need them. So books are going to be okay.
I also think saying books are dead is like saying newspapers are dead. Well, maybe the hard newspaper or the hard book that you get will not be in circulation, or you won't be able to get them as prevalently, but it doesn't mean the amount of content is going to go down. You're going to get different delivery systems and read them different ways. But I don't see, this is anecdotal, but I don't see reading decreasing, particularly with the American public. And there are different ways to get it, and maybe it won't be going into Barnes & Noble or and picking a book off a shelf, but you're going to find a way to read your book.
And the arc of a narrative over 300, 400 pages is very different than the arc of a narrative over, 500 words, which is there's a lot of concern and questions about length of stories, right? And you mentioned The Atavist, and Nick has only briefly introduced it, but I wonder what you think about this, long-form storytelling versus short-form storytelling. And Nick, tell us a little about why The Atavist just got nominated for 3 National Magazine Awards, which is the same number as all the big name magazines you've heard of.
Fortunately, the New Yorker got more, which makes my life okay, because it would be weird.
Double whammy, right? But
you should explain what it is.
Yeah, but do explain what it is.
So I'll explain what The Atavist is. So The Atavist, it's a magazine, and you can read it on your desktop, you can read it on your phone, but it's only digital. There's no print copy. And what we do is every month we just publish one long story. It's like 10,000 words or 15,000 words, and it has all this great multimedia embedded. It's soundtracks. Soundtracks play while you listen to it that change as you move through the story. They're videos that you have to watch. They're not sort of addendums. They're things you have to watch to understand the story. There's audio you have to listen to. And we choose the stories based partly on what we think will be the best text narrative, but also partly what will allow for the most form of experimentation. Sometimes they're heavier on video, like there's more video than there are words. Sometimes there are many more words than there are video. And we've tried to build it so that they're layers, that the information is presented cleanly, but you can press a button and then sort of these layers appear behind it. So it's a new technology for long-form storytelling. Now, to your larger question about long-form narratives, I obviously have a vested interest in this, working at The New Yorker, but I think they're going to do fantastically. I think they are doing fantastically. I think we've seen a surge in them over the last couple years, and I think that's due to a few things that are kind of interesting for the future of journalism. First is the creation of tablets, and they're great for reading, right? Reading on your desktop, reading a long story kind of stinks, because you're in an uncomfortable chair, the light is bad, and your boss writes. A tablet, you can just read. So there's a sort of a technological shift. Secondly, the web kind of got reoriented from search to social, and it turns out that people like to share stuff they're proud of reading. So the fact that Google is not as powerful in driving content as Facebook actually kind of gives incentives for people to create things that people like. Third, the economics of the web are changing, right? So the amount of advertising on websites, people kind of thought that the rate at what people pay, which are called CPMs, would increase kind of forever as we learned more and the cookies got better. And you learned that actually, I like to buy running shoes, therefore the running shoes company will pay more to target me specifically. So people thought there'd be this infinite upward pressure on CPMs. It turns out there's not, right? Because the amount of places where people can advertise expands massively at the same time. So supply and demand, kind of a complicated argument. Basically, CPMs are not going up as high as they should. So advertising online is hard. So you need to search for other economic models. One of the other economic models is like events or its subscriptions. And to get people to pay for that kind of stuff, you have to produce content that is really good, is really special, and that people want to associate with. So that is driving people to do more and more long form. So you see long-form publications existing. You see places like Slate that are doing more of this stuff, and it's been fantastic. And then you're even seeing places like BuzzFeed and Business Insider, which spent their early years kind of trying to undercut it by aggregating long stories, creating their own stuff, some of which has been fantastic. So I think long-form journalism is doing great and will continue to do great for a while. Man, I'm being so optimistic. I'll be negative on the next question.
Okay.
Television.
Let's get back to the negative thing, because
Screwed.
we did start this conversation by saying, people love to hate the media. It's just, we're blaming all of our bipartisan conflict largely on cable news and blogs and, highly spirited, emotionally inflected writing and journalism, right? So what do you think about that? Is it fair to blame the media for all of our cultural ills and our political problems?
Yes.
Or not? yeah, exactly. This is your chance. Willie, what do you think? Because you're right there
Do I
in
think
the
it's
middle.
fair to blame cultural ills on the media? No, I don't think so. I think
And on Morning Joe in particular.
Morning Joe in particular. Morning Joe I do blame. Yes. Morning Joe is responsible for everything. No, I mean, the truth is, and I think you guys would agree with this, today you don't have to read anything that you don't agree with. Right? You can find the websites that you are comfortable with, where your views are affirmed for you. You can follow people on Twitter, which is the way a lot of people get their news inside the news business. They follow people they know, they follow people they like, they follow news organizations whose views are shared by them. And I think, to me, that's the real danger, is that everything is reaffirmed for you and no one challenges themselves. I try to do it, especially, I use Twitter as a news ticker, and I follow people I couldn't agree with less. And I'll read their argument, and I may dismiss it, but I may find something in it that challenges me and changes the way I look at a story and changes the way I treat it on television. So I think it's bigger than just the media. I think it's cultural. I think it's in Washington. It's Congress being totally divided and not able to do anything. And in some ways, the media is a reflection of that. But the thing I am worried about is that it's going more toward partisanship, not more away from it, because it's easy to do it. I mean, it used to be if you just picked up the New York Times, you were going to go, or the Wall Street Journal, you'd come across some things that perhaps you didn't agree with or perhaps you didn't know about it. Now you can follow somebody on Twitter, go to a website, or turn on a cable news show where you can go, yes, got him. And it's this whole gotcha, kill the other side thing. And I do think that's bad for the country.
So it is causing all of our cultural and political.
Not all of them, but some of them, yes. I'll give you some.
No, but it's not the. But again, it's, as Willie said, it is not the media. It's that it's only insofar as fragmentation, segmentation allows us to find comfortable worlds. We find the world that satisfies us. It's more like you choose your facts. You choose your facts based on what you believe, and you can find someone who will tell you the facts that you want to believe. And all of us do it. And it puts places like the New Yorker and Slate, both of which are relatively heterodox. I think, any conservative is going to say, oh, Slate's like a lefty rag and the New Yorker's a lefty rag. But we're relatively heterodox. But it puts us in a weird state because you get your biggest audience by telling a certain segment what they want to hear. So if we publish just the, whatever lefty line is, we will get a bigger audience than if we try to tell people something they don't want to hear. And so there's a huge incentive for any heterodox publication to become orthodox, and I hate that.
That's such an interesting point, and I want you to all of you to hear, how do you choose what you what you publish every day and what stories you focus on every day, because you are essentially curators of our cultural agenda. You're incredibly influential in in shaping this stream of information that people encounter. How do you decide what to elevate to prime time or to prime magazine real estate, and how do you decide not to cover something? And I'd also like to hear actual specific stories and examples of times when you felt like, wow, this is a big story that's going to hit, and it didn't, or stories that you had to give a lot of airtime to that you didn't want to. Who wants to go first?
Well, I think that Willie and maybe Nick and I will have different takes on this. And TV is this time-constrained medium. There's a limit to what you can cover and how you can cover it because you just have an hour or 2 hours, and so there's only so much you can do. The great thing about and terrible thing about the digital space is that it expands infinitely. So I was reading, Nick, that you guys you've doubled your publication or something in the last year, and we've done the same because the more you publish, the more readers you get. And it also means you don't have to choose as much. You sort of say, we don't have to choose between chocolate and peanut butter. We can have chocolate and peanut butter today, and and sometimes we'll mix the chocolate and peanut butter. But it is you do choose hierarchies, but what you devote more resources to things. But it's rarely a case that you say, I'm not going to cover this in the digital space. It just maybe it gets fewer readers, maybe you do a little bit less of it, but there's always room for it.
I think from a TV point of view on Morning Joe, again, my two jobs are so different, so these are two different conversations. But Morning Joe, if we have something to say about it, a smart take about it, we will tackle that story. Now, these shows all take on the personalities of the people who are on the show. And Morning Joe is the host of our show, Joe Scarborough, and he's a former Republican congressman. He leans conservative, obviously. So he might bring a set of stories to the morning where we're like, I didn't even read that story. What is that? And it's a culture war story, or whatever it is. And so we try to balance that out. And we've now, over 7 years, built a relationship with our audience that we feel like we know how far we can go with them and what kind of stories they're interested in hearing from us. And really, the bar for us is, do we all have something interesting to say? Are we adding to the story in any way? Do people have a take on this story? Like it's been beaten to death, but the plane disappearance, the Malaysian plane disappear. Fascinating story. A plane vanished off the face of the earth, but at some point there was nothing else to say about it. There just wasn't. And there were no.
When you turned to CNN.
Well, right. I'm glad you said it. But truthfully, you have to, as a journalist, say there are no more facts to be brought to bear here. And my speculation, I'm not an aviation, there's nothing I could bring to this conversation that is of value to our viewers. So we just stopped talking about it. And we said out loud, we said, when something happens in this story, we will bring it to you. Now, that wasn't network-wide, I don't think. That was a decision we made on our show. And I think we obviously talked less about it than CNN did. And I think we saw a lot of this a year ago, like during the Boston bombing, when you have these fluid news stories, and it's going on for days and days, and it's like there's this pressure. We're on the air. This is the story. You have to do that story because it's all anyone wants to know about. But there's nothing to say about it. And so I think we're pretty disciplined, or we try to be anyway, and not just being on TV talking about the thing that everyone is talking about if there's nothing to say about it. Because that's how you get into trouble, and you say, they caught the bomber and he's a Muslim terrorist, and he just isn't. And because you're on TV and you found some parcel of information and you say so-and-so is reporting, and then you report that and put it on the air, that's not valuable. And that's why people begin to, they distrust news, and they distrust cable news, because they know that a lot of what you're saying is skywriting, that you throw it out there, it evaporates, and no one remembers what you said, and it has no value.
But Nick, before you just on that point, I think one really interesting part of this is that what then gets screwed is sort of big, slow-moving stories that are harder to cover. And obviously, climate change is number one, although New Yorker has done a great job not falling into that. But we cover climate change terribly. And China is one where China is the big global story of our time, but we don't have the money to send someone to be a reporter there, and so we haven't done it. We basically never cover China, even though that's lame, and we're screwing over our readers. And it's hard. It's very hard with the recency bias of news and of the internet in particular to get those big things. But the New Yorker, I think, is the exception.
Well, the New Yorker magazine is the exception, right? So we decided, China's a huge story, so we sent Evan Osnos to China to report from there. We decided, the Arab Spring is a huge story, so we sent Peter Hessler to Egypt, and he lives there and learns Arabic and writes stories for us every 6 months on what's happening in Egypt. So the magazine can do that. The website is harder. The website is a little different because we're constrained in a couple ways. We're only publishing 15 or 18 stories a day, so you're not covering that much. You're not a place where people are getting basic news information. We're not rewriting the news. No one's coming here for you're coming here for some sort of analysis or some writing. So the two examples that came up maybe will help illustrate what we do. So the plane came up. Nobody wrote about it the first day because we didn't have anything to say the first day. We were all just sort of learning. And we're sitting around, okay, so what can we write about this? And well, we don't have anybody who's a fantastic reporter on this. Maybe Larry Wright can write about the terrorism connection. And they thought, well, who's the best aviation writer out there? What about James Salter? Right? He's a novelist. He's written for us. He's awesome. Let's write to James Salter, and he will write something beautiful. I don't know what he'll say, but it will be great. And so we got this beautiful little essay from James Salter about planes and what the turn must have been like for the passengers. And it was, it was different because it was beautifully written, and that's what we're trying to do at the New Yorker. We want people to come to the New Yorker and feel like they've been somewhere distinct, and they read this great James Salter essay. So we really didn't do that much. But we are also dependent on what we know about and what we care about. So the Boston bombing happened, and I'm a marathoner, and I'm from Boston, and I run the site. So this was...
We had a lot.
So there was a lot of coverage because I felt like I really knew a lot about it. And so I don't know, I wrote every day. God knows what I wrote about. I was interviewing people who were in strange photographs. I wrote about the running blog where some of the pictures spread. I mean, when you get deep, we had different stories about Reddit. We had different stories about Joker. We had, I think we had 56 stories about it, which is not a lot for some publications, but for the New Yorker, it's a ton. We had a lot of writers in Boston. It just happened to be something that we knew a lot about, we cared a lot about, and with enough people really, really digging in deeply, you can find interesting stories. I mean, the running blog story I wrote, this is, I don't know, the bottom half of, stories I wrote during the year, but it's an example of when you're really obsessed with a story, you're reading every blog about it. And it was kind of interesting, like, what are the characteristics of this forum that have allowed it to kind of catch 3 internet memes in the last year? Like, what about the way the comments work and the threads work? And really, when you really dig into anything, if you really dig into this carpet, somebody smart can say something interesting about it, like what it means culturally and how it absorbs sound and what's that meant for this institution.
Is John McPhee doing that story now?
On the carpet, yeah. John McPhee is on this carpet. Anyway, that's part of the New Yorker tradition, is like finding small things, obsessing about them. And so the plane and the Boston bombing give you 2 examples which might be contradictory or might explain themselves. I'm not sure.
I'm so interested in this number 18, that you do 18 stories a day. How many stories do you tell a day, or do you sort of oversee a day?
Slate does about 60. We want to get up to about 100.
60 to 100 stories a day?
We do about 60. We want to get to 100.
Okay, so 60. Okay. And Willie, what about you? How many stories are you telling a day? Are you sort of overseeing?
Morning Joe, we can spend the first 30 minutes about like one sound bite that happened the night before. So it's probably not the best example. I don't know, between 2 shows. Today's show, the timing is different. You just whip through things. So they probably get 25, 30 in a show. So I don't know, 50 maybe, something like that.
Because we hear, and you've mentioned, all of you probably at this point, Twitter and the just extraordinary multiplicity of stories and circulation of information that's going on. And Willie, I'd love to know from you first. You said this is your news feed, and virtually every journalist I know uses Twitter as its source for story leads and as its news source. How is Twitter changing what you cover and how you cover it on television? Because at this point, television is reaching by far many more people than any written publication online or in print. But this new medium, this Twitter and other aspects of blogging and microblogging are really changing what we see on television. I'd love your insights on that.
Well, just as a practical matter, it's easy. It's in front of you, and if you follow everybody you can follow, you've got a news ticker in front of you. And I have it up during the show, so I can know instantly if something's broken or somebody has put out a piece that we need to add to the conversation or talk about. It's very helpful. On the other hand, it is, you can get caught living in the media bubble when you're just reading your Twitter feed, and something that maybe has, quote, blown up among the 100 of us who work in the press in New York and Washington, and is a giant story in Washington, maybe shouldn't be a giant story. Whether it's a gaffe somebody made or something somebody said on the campaign trail, or someone has given a spin on a story on the jobs numbers that's, somebody thinks that the jobs numbers are corrupt and the way we do it is wrong. You just have to take a step back because it is so quick and it is so instant, and if everyone's tweeting it and retweeting it and everyone has a take on it all of a sudden, it starts to grow and you can get buried under the mass of it. You have to, as a journalist, be able to step back and say, does this matter? Is this information accurate? And what does it have to do with what we're talking about today? Because I think there is definitely a media bubble. There's no getting around it. From Boston down to DC. And you have to be careful about not living exclusively in that bubble, and Twitter lends itself to that.
Willie is definitely right about that. One other thing about Twitter is that, I'm sure David has noticed this too, people don't click on your stories from Twitter. There is the impression that you're getting lots of traffic on Twitter because people are talking about your stories. And when I first started in this job 2 years ago, it was like, let's do better on Twitter. Let's everybody get tweeting their stories. It's nothing. It's coming from Facebook, right? It's coming from Reddit. It's coming from all sorts of places. Like Twitter drives, 15% of your social traffic, whereas it consumes like 80% of your social media attention. So that was sort of a surprising thing I've learned through data analytics. The other thing about Twitter is I want somebody, maybe David, you can do it with your Slate writers, do a regression analysis of number of tweets per year and number of stories written per year. And I think there might be a negative correlation. I feel like, I'm a little scared to do it at the New Yorker, but you can't just get lost in Twitter because it's a media bubble. You can get lost in Twitter and you can kind of farm out your best ideas on Twitter. Like a thought comes to you, and actually save that thought and think about it for a month and then turn it into an 8,000-word story, but it's like, I'm on Twitter! So there's a lot of, I love Twitter, I'm on it all the time, but...
So you use it the same way Willie does? as a news feed and I
use it as a news feed, I use it to promote New Yorker stories, I use it to argue with people, I use it a lot. Basically I tweet out long magazine stories. I tweet them out under the hashtag long reads. And I do this every day. I tweet out New Yorker stories, and that night I tweet out long reads, and I tweet out weird infographics I found. Like, those are the three things I do. And then I rant about Boston sports. Like, that's what I do on Twitter, and I enjoy it. And I occasionally fight with other journalists.
Good thing you're filling that niche. Nobody is doing that on Twitter.
I know. The long reads thing is actually, I feel like, a service to the greater world of Twitter, and the rest is useless.
The Boston, man, you Boston Twitter people, are the worst.
Did you tweet out a picture of your new baby?
No, I did not.
How old's your baby?
4 weeks.
Oh my gosh,
yesterday.
Congratulations.
Yeah. I did, this is the other problem with Twitter, I did accidentally, while the phone was in my pocket, tweet out a picture of my 2 other kids in the bath yesterday because of the damn Privacy Act. Anyway, I deleted it after like 2 seconds because somebody sent me a direct message, but Twitter's weird. Like, everybody, blah, blah, blah.
I think the point Nick made about Facebook is really important, and one thing that Facebook is clearly knows how important it is becoming to journalism, and they did something to their algorithm in November, and all of a sudden places like Slate, I suspect the New Yorker, the Atlantic, quality sites suddenly started getting surges of traffic, and whereas Facebook used to be sort of twice our Twitter traffic. And Facebook is now 3 or 4 times our Twitter traffic, and it's put Twitter I think in a bad state because it does serve this very useful service. People need it; they want to have a conversation on it. But as a useful mechanism for getting people to your stories, it's become less and less valuable. And
at the same time, Upworthy went down. There's a lot of debate about these numbers, and you may be more up on it than I am.
But it seems like there were a lot of sites that were kind of gaming the system, like coming up with sort of, all the Upworthy headlines that, they provide some value, but are also kind of ridiculous. And Upworthy's Facebook traffic with this change went down.
But do you use it the same way? I'm just curious. Is it something that you're tapped into as much as these guys, or no?
No, I tweet in roughly the same way, minus the horrible Boston sports glotation. But I tweet sort of in a similar...
What was the word?
Glotation.
Oh, glotation.
Yeah. Flotation was a Malaysian plane. Too soon, sorry. It was, but I don't use it as my news feed particularly. I like go use the Times. I use the Times as my basic news source, and then Twitter is for fun.
But you tweet. I follow you in part because you tweet out. You're a good curator of Slate stories, right? If he tweets out a Slate story, it's one of the best Slate stories of that day. So that's helps me choose which Slate stories to read. So I follow him. I'm proud to do so.
You guys get a lot of hate tweets?
No, do you? You're
Well, when
you're
on
like a
TV.
celebrity.
No,
Yeah.
but when you're on TV, everyone hates you. So,
But do you check who's tweeting at you? Do you
well,
pay
you
attention?
see,
I do.
if your name is in it, it just comes up.
No, I
and
know,
you can't
but
avoid it.
Well, but
So,
I don't know. But you can try not to pay too
You
much
can-
attention to that.
oh, I don't live and die by it. But you can block people is important, and dismiss them. Sometimes fighting back is fun. And you know what the funny thing is? Everyone's so big and bold when they tweet, I'm going to, and then you just tweet something back sort of polite. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry, man. I'm going through some stuff at home. I didn't. You can diffuse people on Twitter like that. So sometimes that's fun to do.
So you did mention that you like to follow people you disagree with, and I have to ask you, who are these people, these provocative people that you like to follow? And please share your favorite people to follow on Twitter, since
my
it is so
gosh.
relevant to our conversation.
I don't know. I mean,
I don't fall hard on one side of the political spectrum or the other. I mean, I love reading these two guys, but then I'll also follow like Red State, and like these are more conservative blogs and people who are coming at the news, because when you live in New York, let's be honest, you're getting a little center left. That's sort of the point of view you're getting. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's kind of what you're getting. So I just think it's important to balance out those. I don't follow like the crazy people who are talking about like false flag operations and things like that. But I think reasonable people on both sides. I follow both of those. Was that vague enough for you?
Yeah, you totally dodged that one.
I got a very specific, slightly appalling pro tip for Twitter users, and that is follow the long reach hashtag through Hootsuite and filter by clout score. So what that means...
What did he just say?
Yeah. So the long reach hashtag is anybody, or people who tweet out long magazine stories will append this hashtag. So you can create a column, or if you're just using Twitter on your web browser, you can search for it, and we'll put all the people who've used that hashtag. However, there are also a lot of spammers who do this, because any hashtag that gets popular, people will like spam, 7-Up ads or whatever, hashtag whatever is there. So in Hootsuite, you can actually filter by clout score, which is a measure of someone's social media input, which basically, if you set it at a low level, allows you to filter out spam. So it's a way to actually curate your list of long magazine stories, which is really important to my job. So that's the thing I spend the most time on Twitter doing. So there's very specific and totally ridiculous and dorky. As opposed to vague and kind of dorky.
I'm not even going to ask you that one, David. But I am curious, because we talk about the end of books, or the never end, the books that will never end. But we also, we were talking with Mr. Seigenthaler before this, we were talking about the end of newspapers and what is happening in the world of news. And I think it's very interesting that the Graham family decided to keep Slate and sell the Washington Post. What is your take on that? Why do you think that's happening, and where do you think newspapers are going?
Well, so the Slate was founded by Microsoft when we were started, and in about 2004, the Washington Post company bought us. Washington Post company is much bigger than the Washington Post newspaper. It owns Kaplan, it owns some TV stations, it owns a hospice company, which was where the newspaper readers were going. And it owns a boiler manufacturing company, and it owns Slate. And so then they sold the Washington Post newspaper to Jeff Bezos, but Slate remained in what's now called the Graham Holding Company, after Don Graham, or the Graham family, which owns us. And the Post had also sold Newsweek a couple of years earlier, which had been bleeding money. And I think that the sale of the Post, in one sense, it was terribly sad, because this is the Graham family is a national treasure. The family is an amazing family. We saw it in Watergate, and we saw it in the Pentagon paper. They had Pentagon paper stuff too, didn't they? The Post? Yes, they did. But didn't the Post have a piece of that? No, the Post had no piece of the Pentagon paper. All right. Well, they had Watergate anyway. That was pretty good. That was a good run. And so they. But I think they felt like this was a huge multi-billion-dollar company, and the Post newspaper there was no clear way out. And Jeff Bezos was a true white knight. He's a long-term thinker. He really wants to make this work. He thinks of it as a public trust in the way the Graham family did, and he can afford to lose a significant amount of money on this newspaper going forward. And so I think it's great, and it's clear people I talk to at the Post are very, very excited about having Bezos as an owner. He seems to be doing a good job. They're investing in all the right ways. That said, it's very alarming that the only way a newspaper as great and as important to the public as the Washington Post can survive is by the kind of goodwill of a multi-billionaire. That's a troubling thing, and I think if you think about a paper like the Tennessean, which is not a paper I read, but that kind of mid-sized newspaper that doesn't really serve a national audience, that's a hard business to be in. And we've lost a bunch of papers. We lost, what was the Denver, didn't we lose one of the Colorado papers? One of the Colorado papers went out of business, and Rocky Mountain News right out of business. And there are places that are not going to have daily newspapers, real cities that will not have daily newspapers, and that's going to be strange.
The Newark Star-Ledger last week slashed 25% of its newsroom. And we all know what goes on in the state of New Jersey. I grew up there. We need local reporters. We need a bigger newsroom in New Jersey. And that is scary. It's a very scary proposition to think that local papers, maybe the Jeff Bezos can come in and save a couple of papers here and there, and that's important, but you can't count on that happening in every newspaper in the country. It's not happening.
Well, we need our resident optimist to jump in here and bring us back from this grim news. But we only have about 15 minutes left, and I want you all to have a chance to ask questions. But before we do, what is your prediction for the next big thing in media? Because as there's this sort of senescence of newspapers, there's also all this innovation and a lot of local storytelling, a lot of new news outlets that are being born. What is the next big thing in media? How do you think we're going to really enrich our experience of storytelling going forward? Let's start with you.
Well, I think there's going to be some kind of convergence of, the reason you have text split off from video and you have video split off from audio is in part because we didn't have the technology to combine them in the past, right? You couldn't, can put a newspaper in a VCR and get something, right? So,
I think Willie's son is doing it.
But so that problem is solved, right? We have devices, and we will soon all have devices that we'd love to read on where you can do this. And I don't know, whether movies are going to become more like books, or books are going to merge with movies. I think the idea of soundtracks that play while you read is a great idea. And we've, at the Atavist, it's hard because people read at different speeds. Right? Soundtracks are hugely important in movies, but you can sync them right up with exactly in the scene. So we kind of loop music through chapters. Right? But someone's going to figure out how to do it better, right? There's going to be some amazing way of combining text, video, audio, all of these things, interactions, people changing the text as you read it or whatever. People are experimenting with this, they're playing with this, but they're playing on the edges, and in a few years I think it'll be really different and interesting.
Well,
That's very, sorry.
I was just saying, you're doing a little of that already.
Yeah, but we're like a tiny niche.
But I know, but you're doing that right now. And
That's so much brotherly love right here. That's
well, no, it's happening. Look at the Atavist, it's happening.
But that's a great thing to tell Music City, because that means that's very good for musicians going forward. You are part of journalists. You are the new journalists, the musicians of the world. Willie, what do you think?
Soundtracks, you guys get into that, like selling your music for stories, for books.
I don't know what you guys think about. We're talking about long-form journalism, but I've heard a lot lately about sort of crowdsource funding long-form journalism, which brings the best of what the web can do socially, which is bring people in one place, and the best of what journalism can do, although it doesn't have the money to do it anymore. So you bring a great journalist together, and he says, I want to go to Rwanda for 2 months, but I need $50,000 to do it. You start a Kickstarter or whatever you're going to call it with journalism, and you get people who believe that's a worthy cause. And instead of using Kickstarter for whatever their startup is or their invention, you use it for media. And that's something I've heard thrown out there. I don't know how viable that is. I don't know how prevalent or prolific that could be, but it's certainly interesting anyway.
I think it's totally interesting, and there are a lot of great models for funding long-form journalism. The most interesting is the Mark Cuban model, where you fund business investigative journalism and then you short the stock of the company that you're about to bring down. Seriously, it's like leading to investigative reporting.
Has that worked?
Yes.
Yes.
Really?
Made money off of this. I don't know, there's some legal issues, but they're like...
Don't get bogged down in
You know,
legal.
anything to support journalism.
Well, I promised a manifesto for audio, so I want to give a brief manifesto for audio. Podcasting is sort of like soccer. It's like the next great American sport, always, eternally the next great American sport. But it really, I think there will be this moment where digital audio of a spoken word, obviously digital audio and music is everywhere, but digital audio, spoken word form, sort of time-shifted radio is going to have the footprint it deserves. And the reason why I think that's going to happen is that every other form of media that you can think of, really, it can only cannibalize something else. Audio can take place while you do other things. And so it's an additive medium, at least for the moment, it's an additive medium. And so once someone becomes a podcast listener, it doesn't really take away from their reading. It's a podcast listening, something you do in the car, out for a walk, walking the dog, in the gym. And people who consume podcasts start to consume lots of them. The average podcast listener listens to something like 11 hours of podcasts. But there are very few of them. There just aren't many people. In fact, let me do a quick audience poll. How many people here regularly listen to podcasts? So this is it's about half in this audience, which is a media literate audience. In the public, it's really more like 10, 15, 20%. But there is so much good stuff happening in digital audio, and it has the potential to grow a huge amount. And it also, I think, there's this, I want to tie it to one other thing, which is there's a new, I think, passion for live experiential journalism. We've seen it, there's a pop-up magazine. We've seen it with Radio Lab, does wonderful live shows. This American Life does live shows. Our podcast, the podcast I host, goes and does live shows. And people really like The Moth, which is who everyone knows The Moth. The Moth was a live performance, which has now become an unbelievably successful podcast. And it's this intersection of live performance and digital experience that is kind of cool, and they can talk to each other. The New Yorker events, the New Yorker Festival is another great example of this, which is super successful, where you have the digital experience, you've read the magazine, you've read the interview with the author, and then you go see them, and you see a performance, you see the movie they're talking about, you hear a discussion of it, and I feel like there's a hunger for that sort of live experience that is going to amplify what's happening digitally.
So, 10 minutes or so remain, and I really hope that you all will stay after there's some food and wine, and you can meet these people, these wonderful people in person. But jump in with questions, and I know enough of you and you know me well enough to know that I will call on you if you don't jump out of your chair with questions. Okay, I saw your hand up there.
Sure. Thanks for coming, you guys. Great panel.
Thank you.
Question about how people consume news on the other sort of side of the coin. This may be most appropriate for Dave because of the way Twitter works. So, thinking about Twitter and hearing you guys talk about how you use Twitter, you use it in different ways. One way to think about it is some people just like to scroll the feed. Willie does that. Others, I get it.
I read it. I don't just go like that. Yeah. An exercise.
It sounds like he's putting things in piles and categories. He's using Hootsuite. He's probably got the columns going with different lists and stuff. And you know, Slate used to categorize content, and now it's more of just a Twitter feed-like mass all thrown together. That's oversimplified, I'm sure. The question is, as curators of all this stuff that we're consuming, how much do you think about whether you want to just merely curate the content and say, here's the mess of stuff you people choose, or how much do you want to categorize for us? Do you think media, the way media delivers all this information to us is changing in terms of this idea of categorization versus unorganized stream?
Well, in the case of Slate, and I suspect most digital media, Slate is unusual in that we still have a loyal homepage audience. People still type in slate.com or they bookmark Slate and they come to Slate. But most digital media, people aren't going to homepages, so they don't really encounter those organizational hierarchies very much. That they end up at stories because a friend recommended it, because they saw it on Twitter, because it popped through on Facebook, because there was a link in another thing they were reading. And so the organizational hierarchies have lost a lot of their significance. Also, the the other forms of filtering seem to be really effective. Like people will tell you, oh, this is this kind of story, so you know what you're getting. And so we have de-emphasized that hierarchy. I think for a place like the New York, a place that is the newspaper of record or the publication of record, those organizational hierarchies matter a lot. But for the rest of us, I feel like they probably don't matter that much, that you're counting on other recommendations to order it for you. But is that true for you guys, Nick?
That's totally true. I've just spent the last 2 days watching users use our site, and it's, everything David says is true. The other thing that we found is that, we have these cute blog titles like Currency and Elements, and no one knows what the hell those mean. So, well, it's changed to like Daily Business or Daily Technology, and that'll make sense to them. You notice we changed a really acute reader of The New Yorker would notice that today, after this user testing, we changed our sub-nav bar. So instead of listing like our blogs with their cute, awesome names, we now just list the names of people, right? Because people understand that. Anyway, so the hierarchy is absolutely changing. The categories are becoming less important. Homepage is still incredibly important for places like Slate or the New Yorker, because it's where you show yourself off to the world, and you have really valuable visitors there.
Jesse.
Touch really briefly on the economics of digital journalism, both paid content as well as ad content. Do you think it's possible for anybody besides kind of this upper echelon of media companies who have either monopolies on content like an ESPN or really great reportage like a New Yorker to make money on the internet?
Yes, it's hard, right? So the economics of the internet are pretty tricky, right? So you're going to get, you've got to base, well, the Atavist. So we came up with this crazy business model, which is create journalism on the internet and support it by creating a CMS, right? So the ways to make money there are lots of ways to make money on the internet. You can make money through advertising, which is very hard if you're not one of those places. You can make money on the internet by having, sponsored events. You can make money on the internet by shorting stocks. I mean, there are about like 10 or 15 ways you can make money. So you just have to be very creative about the way you do it. You can have stories, and you can have then sort of sponsored events that are sponsored by the local pizza parlor, and then have journalism about the town. So there are ways to do it. You just have to be creative economically.
Just to that point, so I was thinking about just this issue the other day. And I was thinking in 2000, I was sort of thinking back to Slate. In 2000, there were 4 ways that Slate got money, and that I could think of that digital sites could get money. I started making a list of all the ways that digital media get money now, and I stopped at 59. Like, there's just so many different interesting business models, and a lot of them won't work, or they'll only work at certain kinds of scale. But I'm pretty bullish about it. I don't think I'm not bullish like anyone's going to have the kind of profits that the Washington Post was throwing off in the 70s and 80s. No one's going to do that. But you can get by. It'll work.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you think the credibility of the news media is being affected by the expansion of social media and the internet?
The credibility of the media. I think when you have more outlets out there, it's more ripe for crazies to come out. I mean, there are some very fringy sort of sites, and there are fringy TV shows, and there are all those kinds of things. So yeah, but I think that the credibility of the media question is, I think it's larger than that. I think we're, organizations like the ones up here who view themselves as credible and responsible, I think sometimes are lumped in with ones that are not, perhaps, and so you say the media is not trustworthy anymore. We earn it sometimes, but I don't think having more outlets necessarily makes us less trustworthy or less credible, but it could give the appearance that we are, because, listen, there are some crazy people putting out news today.
Yeah.
This is really for David and Nick, because you've been talking about the fact that you kind of focus on political topics, right? That's your main thing?
Not me.
Right. Okay, so it's David.
Willie does politics even more, maybe. I think we're.
So what I heard is that David and Nick, you do a lot on politics.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do you consider doing other types of stories outside of politics?
We do a lot
Yeah,
of it.
so I can answer that. So the New Yorker does do a lot of politics, but it's a pretty small percentage of what we do. We have, I don't know, let's say our content is pretty evenly split across 6 blogs. Books and literary, we put fiction on our site. We're a rare site that has fiction, and actually a lot of people read it, which is great. So we're doing a lot of literary work. We're doing a lot of fiction. We're trying to get even literary coverage of politics, and then a lot of technology and a lot of business. So there's a real mix. We try to have the same. The magazine probably has one political story every 2 weeks, so it's 10% of its content, and we try to have about the same mix on our site.
You had, 2 issues ago, you had Kobe on the cover.
Yeah,
right?
we had Kobe, yep.
And then there was a piece, a Malcolm Gladwell piece about the siege at Waco. So,
right.
There's a lot of variety in New Yorker, I would argue.
Question too for Willie, but I'll ask you later.
Okay. We'll talk over some wine outside. Yeah.
Okay, I want to represent the middle section here in the green.
There's been a lot of excitement this spring around this new story, media ventures, thinking Vox, thinking the Upshot, New York Times, thinking 538. But they're still all concentrated in D.C. and New York. Do you see this trend reversing at all, and something amazing popping up in another part of the country?
It's a really interesting question.
Somebody else answer that.
Well, there's no reason it couldn't. I mean,
There's no reason it couldn't,
Nate
but
Silver could do what he does in Des Moines or anywhere else.
But Nate Silver also moved specifically to New York,
From Chicago, yeah.
right there.
Right. But it's not, I'm saying it's
Yeah.
not impossible, because those are sort of one-man brands, and it could be Bill Simmons in sports, these guys who've taken these entities that start
Where does
with
Bill
them.
Simmons live? Does he live in
He's
Boston?
in L.A.
He's in L.A.
Yeah, he lives in L.A.
So in so maybe geography doesn't make that much difference for, maybe forget it.
I mean, it's one of the interesting things about the internet, right? The internet should actually lead everybody to disperse, because you can all work at home, you can work forever, we could have virtual offices, you could put the New Yorker in Denver and it wouldn't make a difference. But also, coincident with the rise of the import of the internet has been a consolidation of media and economic power in a couple of cities. So I don't know whether this will split or whether this will break. Like, you look at the best long-form magazine writing in the country, and there is a lot of it in New York, Washington, but there's also a whole bunch in Austin. So there are absolutely ways to do it. It is, there are a couple of mysteries about the internet. There are a couple of things that sort of frustrate me about the internet. The biggest one is the fact that it hasn't brought us together, like infinite trove of information. You'd think that we would have infinite consensus and knowledge, and it turns out it splits us apart into Republicans and Democrats. And the other is that the internet, which was supposed to actually lead to a democratization of wealth and people being able to make money everywhere, seems to actually have consolidated wealth in a couple of cities and consolidated industries in cities. So those are unfortunate mysteries and weird things, and maybe they'll reverse, maybe they don't, but they're things I would have predicted the opposite of 15 years ago.
Can I take your question in just a slightly different direction, which is that you talked about the rise of Vox and the 538 and these wonk publications, which are all getting started. That, to me, is an amazing new development of the internet. This is a entirely new form of journalism being done by people who are basically not trained journalists. These are all, they were sort of self-taught economists, statisticians, college kids who just taught themselves how to write and how to do stats and econometrics, and it's created a kind of rigor in journalism that I find totally thrilling. We lost Matt Iglesias to Vox, and it was very sad, but I couldn't be happier just to see this proliferation. It's a really, really good thing.
So we only have time for one or two more questions. Yeah.
When you're writing for the internet, it's like the media changes the message. We all know that. Every media has a different way of communicating. And with the search engine optimization being so important for people finding your message, does that actually change your first words, say in that beautiful article that man might write about the missing plane? Do you have to rewrite those first words? Are you conscious of rewriting for SEOs when you're writing your articles?
No, there's a piece of paper on the wall in front of every producer's computer at the New Yorker that says you never change the text of a story for SEO. You can change the headlines, you can change the metadata, you can change stuff around, but the story is sacred and we never do it, and everybody has very firm instructions never to.
Is it really? There's really a piece of paper?
I put it there. I hate that. I gave it to them, I put it there, they all have to have it.
David, did you do that too?
No, one thing that's happened is that SEO is increasingly less important, at least for it's search engine optimization, and it's allowing basically Google to see your site and to see your story and to value it higher than the story that ran in The Economist or that's on the Today Show site or the Morning Joe site. And it's not that we would do that. But what's increasingly, in our case, that it's social, so Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, LinkedIn, those are much more useful sources of traffic. So we don't spend a lot of time worrying about SEO.
So we'll take all the other questions outside by the wine and food. And thank you again, Mr. Seigenthaler, for hosting this conversation. Thank you to all of you with an infant 4 weeks old and all your other demands. Thank you for coming here to Nashville on the most beautiful day of spring we've had so far. Thanks for Mark and all the department heads for sponsoring this conversation. It's just so exciting to me to have such great talent here at Vanderbilt. And yay, we'll do this again.